a level 6 felony, and count 8, neglect of a dependent. Again, on this date, the undersigned deputy prosecuting attorney of the 19th District, being duly sworn on his or her oath, says that Marion County, Indiana, on or about February 9th, 2023, Roan Waters did knowingly kill another human being, to wit, Oaklee Snow. Count 2, on or about February 9th, Roan, being at least 18, having the care of Oaklee Snow, dependent less than 14, did knowingly place said dependent in a situation that endangered the dependent's life or health, which resulted in the death of Oaklee Snow. Count 3, on or about February 9th, Roan Waters, being at least 18, having the care of Oaklee, did knowingly deprive her of necessary support. He did not obtain medical care, which resulted in her death. Count 4, on or about February 9th, Roan, having the care of Oaklee, did knowingly place her in a situation that endangered her life or health, and that said act resulted in serious bodily injury to her, to wit, unconsciousness. On or about February 9th, Roan Waters, a person at least 18, did knowingly touch Oaklee Snow, a person under the age of 14, in a rude, insolent, or angry manner by throwing Oaklee Snow, resulting in bodily injury, that is, bruising. On or about or between January 15th and February 9th, Roan Waters, having the care of Oaklee Snow, did knowingly place said dependent in a situation that endangered the dependent's life. Count 7, on or about or between January 15th and February 9th, Roan, having the care of Madison's son, a dependent, did knowingly place said dependent in a situation that endangered the dependent's life or health. Count 8, on or about February 9th, Roan, having the care of Madison's son, a dependent, did knowingly abandon said dependent, all of which is against the peace and dignity of the state of Indiana. Right. Affidavit for probable cause. State of Indiana, County of Marion. I am a police detective with Indiana Metropolitan Police Department, the IMPD. He's a law enforcement officer. He has been for about 19 years. He graduated ILEA and IMPD Leader Academy, so he's legit. Okay, and it says it doesn't contain every detail, just enough for probable cause. All right. All right. Facts of the investigation. On October 26, 2022, Madison Marshall contacted the Oaklee County Sheriff's Department in Oklahoma to report allegations of physical assault by her boyfriend, Roan Waters. Marshall alleged that Roan had struck her 1.5-year-old daughter, Oaklee, in the face during an altercation the day prior. Roan then hit Marshall in the head when she attempted to intervene in the assault. Deputies with the OCSO arrived at Marshall's shared residence with Roan in Cromwell, Oklahoma, and attempted to make contact with the occupants. Roan answered the front door and asked the deputies if they had a warrant to be on his property. Before they could even answer, he slammed the door in their faces. The deputies attempted to explain through the closed door the purpose of their presence there was for a welfare check. But Roan yelled for them to get the fuck out. As the deputies returned to the marked police vehicles, a blue-colored SUV pulled up next to them. They identified multiple occupants inside of it to include Marshall Oaklee and Marshall's 3-month-old son, CS. Roan appeared to see Marshall's interaction with the officers and exited from the residence. He immediately began yelling, so that the deputies could no longer hear what the occupants of the car were saying. Waters also began playing loud music to try and interfere with what they were saying, so that they couldn't be heard. The deputies eventually left the property after Marshall attempted to assure them that she and her children were not in danger. Later that day, Zach Snow contacted the OCSO in Oklahoma to inform them that Madison would now like to make a formal report to them. Zach identified himself as the biological father of Oaklee and CS. Deputies arrived at Zach's father's residence in Cromwell and spoke with Marshall. She was present with her 2 children. Marshall said that Roan had struck Oaklee in the mouth with an open hand on October 5th, 2022, because she was crying. Marshall lifted up Oaklee's upper lip so that the deputies could see the cut on the other side. Marshall explained that after Roan hit Oaklee, she confronted him. He then slapped Marshall across the left side of her face. The impact left a contusion over Marshall's left eyelid and cheek, which were visible to the deputies. They photographed Marshall's and Oaklee's injuries and documented the report in order to present the case to Oaklee County Prosecutor's Office for possible charges. Marshall requested that only charges be filed against Roan Waters for his abuse against Oaklee rather than her. So on November 7th, the District Court of Oaklee County filed a warrant for Roan for his arrest for the charges of child abuse and domestic assault and battery in the presence of a minor. On or about January 19th, ZS Zachary Snow reported the disappearance of Oaklee and his son from his home in Cromwell, Oklahoma. He reported to the Seminole County Sheriff's Office that Marshall and Roan took his children from his home without authorization and had likely fled to Indianapolis to be with Roan's family. On or about March 3rd, the Greenwood Village in Colorado Police Department located and arrested Roan for his outstanding warrant after responding to a complaint regarding occupants of a room at a local Best Western hotel in Greenwood Village in Colorado. Through their follow-up investigation at the scene of the arrest, they determined that Marshall had also been staying with him at the hotel, but had no reason to be detained at the time. Additionally, there were no signs that children had been with them there. Law enforcement identified Roan's cellular telephone number. However, no cell phone was present on Roan's person upon his arrest. Deputies from the Oaklee County Sheriff's Office learned that Roan's arrest that day. They learned of his arrest that day and requested assistance from the Greenwood Village Police Department in Colorado with interviewing him about the disappearance of the children. Detectives interviewed Roan that same day. Roan stated that he had traveled from Oklahoma with Marshall and her 2 children in his blue-colored Dodge Durango, bearing Indiana license plate ZSZ 795. They stayed at a trap house within the city of Indianapolis so that he and Marshall could get high. He further stated that he and Marshall had made the decision to abandon her young son at the trap house and had also left Oaklee behind in Indiana before traveling to Colorado. He added that his sister, KW, had recovered CS, the son, from the house and had since turned him over to the Indiana Department of Children's Services. Roan was unable or unwilling to provide any further information about the trap house or the locations of either child. In the days that followed, Detective Craig Tangeman of the Arapahoe County, Colorado Sheriff's Office assisted the Greenwood Village investigators with reviewing Roan's jail calls made with the Arapahoe County Detention Center while he was pending extradition back to Oklahoma. Roan frequently talked to his mother, identified as BP. So BP is Roan's mom, who was current resident of Indianapolis, Indiana. During these calls, he informed his mom that he had lied to the police and he indeed had been present when the children were each abandoned. He admitted to assisting Marshall with specifically dropping Oaklee off somewhere. However, he did not provide specific details. His mom informed him that Madison had his phone. Roan also spoke to Marshall from the same number, the 2033 number, which was his number. She told him that she planned to change her name, though she never told him what her new alias would be. She explained that she had since made contact with his mom following Roan's arrest from that phone and asked her what she should do now. They agreed to have Roan's older brother, BW, and his wife, DW, travel to Colorado to take her back to Indianapolis. Marshall explained to his mom, she explained that his mom was coordinating these plans with BW and DW on her behalf. There was no discussion as to the whereabouts of Oaklee or her son. On March 6th, at approximately 4:30 p.m., Detective Tangeman contacted Special Agent Len Rothermich of the Indianapolis office of the FBI to report the above findings from the ACSO and ACDC. Believing Oaklee and CS to be in extreme danger, Detective Tangeman requested FBI Indianapolis assistance with locating them. S.A. Rothermich, in turn, contacted Marion County DCS office and confirmed that KW had reported the abandonment and recovery of CS February 9th at approximately 7:41 p.m. She had informed the caseworkers that her brother Roan and Marshall had left the child alone at the residence because they needed to take Marshall's 2-year-old daughter Oaklee to the hospital. KW was unsure if and when they would return. DCS informed S.A. Rothermich that Zach Snow had taken back custody of CS earlier that afternoon, and they had likely returned to Oklahoma. S.A. Rothermich notified your affiant of the above investigation and requested the assistance from the IMPD Missing Persons Unit with locating Oaklee and Marshall. Your affiant and S.A. Rothermich then traveled to BP's place of employment to obtain a statement as to her knowledge of the whereabouts. BP stated that Roan had arrived in Indianapolis back in early February or late January. He had traveled in his blue Dodge Durango with his girlfriend Madison and her 2 small children. BP had only seen them once. However, she had allowed them to stay at one of her residential rental properties located at 305 Albany Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. BP had bought baby formula and supplies to assist them with caring for the kids during their stay, since they had arrived with nothing. She knew Roan and Marshall to actively use drugs, which included their recent visit to Indiana. BP recalled Roan, his friend named Chad, calling her on or about February 9th to say that Roan and Marshall had left him alone with CS. He requested that she immediately come to 305 Albany Street to take custody of him. Roan's mom agreed and rushed to the house. Upon her arrival, she observed Chad standing outside, out front of the house, holding the baby. The baby had no clothes on, and when BP then contacted KW to come to the house to help take care of the baby. This was because BP needed to return to work that day. KW agreed and arrived shortly thereafter. BP was aware of Roan's arrest in Colorado and had spoken to him multiple times over jail calls since then. She stated that she had agreed to help Marshall return to Indiana because she did not think that Marshall had anybody else. Therefore, she sent her eldest son, BW, to Colorado to pick her up and to also recover Roan's Dodge Durango. She reported that BW had successfully returned with both Marshall and the vehicle to Indianapolis in the days that followed. So they went from Oklahoma to Indiana to Colorado, back to Indiana, then she went to North Carolina, and then she came back to Indiana. Wow. BP identified her cell phone number. BP informed your affiant and S.A. Rothermich that it was her understanding that Marshall now had custody of Roan's cell phone. She believed that Marshall had taken it prior to Roan's arrest in Colorado earlier that month. Your affiant and S.A. Rothermich next interviewed KW. KW stated that on February 9th, 23, BP had called her to ask her to come to 305 Albany Street to take custody of CS. KW agreed and rushed to the house. She contacted Roan by cell phone to ask why he and Marshall left CS alone. He explained that Oaklee had been bouncing on a bouncy ball that day and had fallen. He claimed that as a result of her injury, he and Marshall needed to take her to the emergency room. Given the above circumstances, KW feared for CS's well-being at the Albany Street residence and asked her husband to pick them up so that she could temporarily care for the baby at her own house. Approximately 15 minutes later, her husband arrived. Roan and Marshall arrived back at the Albany Street residence at the same time. KW neither saw Oaklee nor did she attempt to speak with Roan or Marshall before departing with CS. She explained to S.A. Rothermich and your affiant that she did not believe that Roan and Marshall could have driven Oaklee to the nearest hospital and then returned back to the house in that short of an amount of time. KW contacted DCS that night and asked them to take custody of CS. She further informed them of the possible circumstances of Oaklee being taken to the hospital for a head injury earlier that day. KW informed your affiant and S.A. Rothermich that she had previously provided this same information to detectives with the SCSO. KW further stated that on the night of March 3, 2023, Marshall arrived at her residence asking if she could stay there. KW told her that she could stay only if she told her where Oaklee was. Marshall refused and left the property on foot. KW had not seen or spoken to Marshall since that time. However, she recalled visiting Roan and Marshall at 305 Albany Street back in late January when they had first arrived in Indianapolis. She observed both Oaklee and CS to be present at their house that day. She additionally observed Marshall assisting Oaklee use the bathroom at one point. Wilkerson saw bruising along Oaklee's legs. She immediately confronted Roan and Marshall as to the source of Oaklee's visible injuries. Roan and Marshall both became extremely defensive and ordered her to leave their house. Since Oaklee's disappearance, KW made efforts to find out what happened to her. She stated that she had visited multiple nearby hospitals, all of which were unable to confirm if Oaklee was ever a patient. She also spoke with the neighbors of 305 Albany Street about any information that they may have had about the day that Oaklee was last seen. One unidentified nearby resident stated that he had last observed Roan and Marshall leaving the house with what looked like a child wrapped in a blanket. He stated that the child did not appear to be moving, talking, or crying. KW informed your affiant and S.A. Rothermich that both Roan and Marshall had told her that they voluntarily chose to give up Oaklee in Indianapolis. She quoted them as collectively saying, "We handled it," and that they had a hard decision to make. They were unwilling to provide any further details as to how they had given her up or where she was now. KW believed that they had likely harmed Oaklee and that she was in extreme danger. It should be noted that S.A. Rothermich identified Community South Hospital, located at 1402 East County Line Road, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Riley Hospital for Children, located at 705 Riley Hospital Drive, Indiana, as the most logical places that Roan and Marshall could have taken Oaklee to if she was suffering from a severe physical injury. S.A. Rothermich verified through the security offices of both hospitals that Oaklee was never a patient there and that they had not located a 2-year-old white female abandoned there in 2023. Wilkerson identified Roan's close friend and roommate at 305 Albany Street as a black male known as Tennessee. He stated that Tennessee was present at the house that day that Oaklee disappeared. Through further investigation, your affiant was able to identify Tennessee as CM. On March 7th, the affiant and S.A. Rothermich interviewed CM. After locating him at 305 Albany Street, CM stated that he had been friends with Roan and recalled when he, Marshall, Oaklee, and CM had moved into the house back in late January of 23. CM intermittently resided at the residence at the time. He described Roan and Marshall as avid drug users. They typically snorted heroin, which would cause them to be non-functioning for prolonged periods of time. He further described Roan and Marshall's care towards the children as relatively inattentive. They rarely, if ever, held them and instead would place them in front of the TV for the majority of the day. They never saw them provide the children with any love or affection. However, CM did also observe bruising on Oaklee's legs prior to her disappearance. CM remembered seeing Oaklee earlier in the day on February 9th. She walked up to CM when he first entered 305 Albany Street that morning and she allowed him to pick her up. However, CM noticed that she was wearing makeup around her eyes and mouth. He had never seen her wear makeup before, and it appeared that it had been applied by an adult. He also noticed a line going from her bottom lip to her chin that resembled a bruise. CM stated he then left the house and did not return until later that day. This was the last time that he saw Oaklee. Later that day, CM observed Roan briefly arrive at BP's nearby place of employment. CM was also visiting there at the time. Roan seemed in a rush and somewhat frantic. He left after briefly conversing with BP. CM then went to visit with B. Waters, who he was close friends with. He remembers B. Waters receiving a call from BP later that afternoon in which she seemed extremely upset. B. Waters responded by saying, "I don't know what the fuck Roan has going on, but you all need to deal with it." B. Waters then hung up the phone. CM stated that B. Waters would not tell him what the call was about that day and had since become much more distant towards him. Later that night, CM returned to 305 Albany. He witnessed both Roan and Marshall there without either of their children. Both of them seemed high on drugs to the point of being incapacitated. CM identified one of the cell phone numbers. As the affiant and S.A. Rothermich interviewed CM, members of the IMPD and FBI Indianapolis Violent Crimes Task Force executed a search of 305 Albany Street following the Marion County Superior Court's granting of a warrant. Upon the completion of CM's above statement, your affiant and S.A. Rothermich returned to the residence to participate in the search. Your affiant observed numerous baby items on the first floor of the residence. This included clothing, toys, a playpen, rocker, unused diapers, and other childcare items. Members of the IMPD crime lab conducted a walkthrough of the residence, but they found no obvious signs of a crime scene. Therefore, no items were taken at that time. Detective Eric Parrish of the IMPD Missing Persons Unit and your affiant both separately interviewed a nearby neighbor of 305 Albany. She informed both of us that she observed a cleaning crew or work company arrive at the residence sometime in February. The crew painted as well as moved items out to include a roll of carpet. They worked late into the night from what she recalled. She was unsure of exactly what date this had all transpired on, but was confident that it transpired at 3:05 on or about the Super Bowl. But she stated that if the police were there looking for evidence of something, that it was probably gone by now. On March 8th, the MCSC authorized a warrant to seize and review historical call logs and cell site history for the two phones. MCSC further authorized a ping warrant be issued to track the 2033 number in order to assist law enforcement with locating Madison Marshall, who they believe now had custody of Roan's phone. On this same day, the MCSC also authorized a warrant to seize and search the Dodge Durango that had been previously registered and used by Roan. Members of the IMPD and FBI recovered it from outside of the home address of B. Waters. Upon law enforcement's arrival, B. Waters' wife, D. Waters, informed them that she had just thoroughly cleaned out the vehicle's interior the day before. She explained that she had done this because the Dodge had smelled overwhelming like animal feces. The IMPD transported the vehicle to IMPD's Animal Control Center for temporary holding in lieu of the search. The IMPD Missing Persons Unit initiated the physical search of the Dodge Durango that day. Detective Canine Handler Anthony Weaver first walked a certified cadaver-smelling canine around the exterior of the vehicle. The dog indicated that human remains may have been inside the Durango. The IMPD Crime Lab unit then searched the interior. They located what appeared to be dried blood splatter in the rear compartment of the SUV. Crime Lab physically removed the cushion material and submitted it to the IMPD property room for holding. On March 9th, your affiant and S.A. Rothermich interviewed D.W. She was aware of law enforcement's investigation into the whereabouts of Oaklee. D.W. stated that she had joined B.W. on his trip to Colorado earlier that month to transport Roan's Dodge Durango back to Indiana. On the same day, hold on, I just lost my spot, sorry. Marshall gave them the keys, and the three of them then drove back to Indianapolis. Shortly after departing, D.W. observed Marshall throw her cell phone out the window. Sometime later, Marshall informed D.W. that she had never wanted Oaklee and tried to explain how challenging motherhood had been for her. Marshall also told her that she ultimately intended to go to North Carolina to be with Nick. Your affiant and S.A. Rothermich then interviewed B.W. B.W. recalled the trip to Colorado on March 2nd. Upon their return to Indianapolis with Marshall, B.W. stated that he had dropped Marshall off near the intersection of Troy Avenue and Shelby Street. B.W. got back in contact with Marshall on March 4th. She did not have a phone, but he was able to find her hanging out at a nearby business. B.W. informed your affiant that he picked her up around 5:30 p.m. that evening and drove her to the Greyhound bus station located in downtown Indianapolis. Your affiant knows the address to be 350 Illinois Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. B.W. further stated the departure time was 7:30 that night. B.W. further stated that he had paid about $180 in cash for her to have a one-way ticket to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and the departure time was 7:30 p.m. that night. B.W. described Marshall as having changed her hair color to black and only having a couple of bags with her when she left. She was unaware of her contacts or current whereabouts in North Carolina. B.W. recalled receiving a phone call from CM on or about February 7th. On that day, CM informed him that Roan and Marshall had taken Oaklee to the hospital to be treated for some kind of injury. 1 second. Sorry, I had to get a drink. So, Roan and Marshall had taken Oaklee to the hospital to be treated for some kind of injury. However, B.W. explained that he was done with Roan by this date due to an altercation that had transpired between the two of them days earlier. B.W. recalled this earlier occasion when he had previously arrived at 305 Albany to visit with Roan. At that time, he observed bruising on Oaklee. So lots of people seem to observe bruising on Oaklee. B.W. stated to your affiant that he immediately attacked Roan Waters, who he confidently believed was the responsible party for those visible injuries. The two briefly fought before B.W. left the property. However, B.W. never attempted to call the police or DCS over what he observed. After the fight, B.W. and Roan stopped speaking to each other. The next time that B.W. heard from him was in the early afternoon hours of February 9th. He received a text from Roan that simply stated, "Bro, I need you." B.W. stated that he did not reply or inquire further to what Roan needed help with that day. On March 12th, S.A. Rothermich interviewed Zach Snow over the phone. Zach Snow informed him that Madison Marshall had a close friend that likely resided in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and he provided her name for possible follow-up. On or about the same day, AT&T returned the SALT records for Roan's cell phone. FBI agent Robertson reviewed the returned records and determined that the 2033 number had numerous incoming and outgoing calls with CM's identified cell phone number and BP's identified cell phone number throughout the afternoon and night of February 9th. S.A. Robertson also identified the 2033 number as having made a single outgoing call to 911 on February 9th at 1:43 p.m. Urifiant has since been able to determine through IMPD dispatch that the call was disconnected before an operator could answer. The operator quickly attempted to call the 2033 back, but there was no answer or return call. Furthermore, there was no collected location history for the 2033 number between the hours of 2:30 and 4:30 p.m. that day. To add, the historical call log records for 2033 showed it making multiple calls going to CM's number between 1:45 and 2:09 on February 9th. These calls immediately followed the attempted 911 call at 1:43 p.m. The records next showed the 2033 receiving multiple incoming and outgoing calls from BP's cell phone between 2:09 and 2:30 that day. They were the last communications that the 2033 cell phone made before likely being powered down until 4:47. This next communication made by 2033 was back to BP's number. AT&T also began providing ping locations for 2033. Detective Tangeman and fellow officers with the ACSO ultimately located and recovered the device from the front desk of an Econo Lodge located at 985 US 24 Highway, Limon, Colorado. The staff explained that they had found the phone abandoned in the parking lot of the hotel on or about March 3rd. Detective Tangeman determined the cell device to be an iPhone 14. He placed it into FBI's Denver property awaiting transfer to the FBI Indianapolis field office for long-term holding. On March 13th, Urifiant went to the Greyhound bus station located at 350 Illinois Street to inquire about their surveillance video and travel manifests. Employees informed me that nobody by the name of Madison Marshall had departed on a Greyhound bus between the dates of March 3rd and March 5th. However, they confirmed that there were indeed departures for that state during this window. They explained that if a customer paid in cash, there was no process to verify the name that he or she had given for the ticket. The employees also explained that the managers with access to the bus station's surveillance cameras were not present that day. Of course. The same day, ZS called S.A. Rothermich with information pertaining to Marshall's potential whereabouts. Zach stated that KW had informed him that Marshall had recently gotten on a Greyhound bus to travel to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Zach began looking through publicly accessible information within Marshall's 3 known Facebook accounts. These accounts maintain the usernames Maddie Marshall Bunny, and Maddie Cooper. To note, the MCSC had previously authorized a warrant to search these accounts as it related to the investigation of Oaklee Snow and Marshall. Because of Zach's efforts, he identified a mutual female Facebook friend of Marshall who maintained the username BT. Zach knew Thomas to be a real person. He also knew her username to be her true name. She was known to reside in or near Fayetteville, North Carolina. She had also visited Marshall in Oklahoma in years past, which was how Zach had come to know her. He explained all of the above information to S.A. Rothermich. He noted that Marshall and BT were close friends. He suspected that if Marshall were to flee to North Carolina, then BT would undoubtedly be the person she would stay with and confide in. Upon receiving this information, S.A. Rothermich and the FBI were able to further identify BT's true name to be BT as previously provided, as well as her most recent home of residence to possibly be in Bladensboro, North Carolina, which was also approximately 45 minutes south of Fayetteville. March 14th, Affiant and S.A. Rothermich returned to the Greyhound bus station. Greyhound employees voluntarily provided S.A. Rothermich with access to the station's internal and external security cameras, as well as permission to download the retained footage as needed. On March 4, 2023, S.A. Rothermich then reviewed the video feed and observed a white female matching the description of Marshall entering the Greyhound bus station. At that time, with a white male that strongly resembled B. Waters. B. Waters appeared to be waiting for Marshall to board a bus. S.A. Rothermich watched Marshall loiter in the interior public area while she waited that night. He observed what appeared to be a cell phone in her hands, which she actively and openly used throughout the time. On March 15th, T-Mobile returned the sought historical records for CM's phone. The returned cell history showed that his phone actively remained in the vicinity of 305 Albany on February 9th between 1 and 4 p.m. On March 16th, the MCSC issued a warrant for Marshall's arrest for neglect of a dependent in violation of code. On March 17th, S.A. Rothermich requested the assistance of Fayetteville Residence Agency of the Charlotte Field Office of the FBI. The matter was ultimately assigned to Task Force Officer Lynn Gralewski-Alley for a follow-up. TFO Gralewski traveled to BT's identified home of residence in Bladensboro, North Carolina. She was able to make contact with Thomas at her residence at the time, but identified a possible phone number for her. TFO Gralewski spoke to Thomas over the phone and explained the current situation, to include the need to find Oaklee Snow and Marshall. TFO Gralewski described BT's response to her to be evasive and non-committal in her willingness to assist investigators. She denied having any recent contact with Marshall or knowing the whereabouts of Oaklee. On March 18th, Zach recontacted S.A. Rothermich. Zach informed S.A. Rothermich that he had identified an additional Facebook account that he believed Marshall was now actively using. Zach was Facebook friends with BT's previously identified Facebook account. Because of this, he was able to view additional content within her profile to include the posts made to her timeline in recent days. Zach provided S.A. Rothermich with screenshots that he had taken on his phone of BT's timeline. The screenshot showed a post to it on March 4th from a Facebook account maintaining the username Bunny Cooper. The post specifically stated, "Text me ASAP." Zach stated that he was confident the Facebook account belonged to Madison. He explained that Bunny was a nickname that BT exclusively used for Marshall. Furthermore, Cooper was Marshall's father's last name and her former maiden name. On March 23rd, members of the FBI Charlotte Field Office Fayetteville Resident Agency located Marshall at BT's confirmed residence in Bunlevel, North Carolina. Upon her arrest, TFO Gralewski and FBI Special Agent Jess Smeltz presented Marshall with her Miranda rights. Marshall said that she understood her rights and voluntarily waived them by signing an advice for rights form. Marshall ultimately told TFO Gralewski that Roan had killed Oaklee at approximately 1:30 on February 9th. Marshall had been in the kitchen at 305 Albany, Indianapolis, Indiana, when Roan entered holding Oaklee. Oaklee was no longer wearing clothes and was not responsive. Roan initially tried to put her in a bathtub to immerse her in cold water in the hopes of reviving her. When that failed, Roan wrapped Oaklee in a pink and black colored blanket that had hearts on it and put her in a rear passenger seat of the Durango. Before departing, he informed Madison that he intended to take Oaklee to the hospital. Madison stated that she tried to call 911 as Oaklee appeared to be dying, but Roan struck her hard enough to knock the phone out of her hands. He then disconnected the call. Marshall stated that upon Roan's return approximately an hour and a half later, he only had the blanket that Oaklee had previously been wrapped in. He stated that he left her naked body in the woods. Roan informed her that he had taken Oaklee to his grandparents' property in Martinsville. He further explained that he had laid Oaklee's body in the woods somewhere on their property. Marshall stated that it could have been in an abandoned house either on or near the area, based on her recollection of Roan's explanation that day and in the days that followed. Marshall said that she was unfamiliar with his family outside of his mother and siblings. She claimed that she had neither met Roan's grandparents nor had she'd been to a Martinsville address. Gralewski informed Rothermich and Urifiant of Marshall's above statement. The FBI and IMPD determined that day that Roan did indeed have family that currently resided in Martinsville, Indiana. They identified the property owners as LS and WS with registered properties at Redbud Lane, Martinsville, Indiana, and Sedgwick Road, Martinsville, Indiana. S.A. Rothermich and Urifiant traveled to the locations and made contact with LS and WS. They confirmed that the one residence was their residential home address, and the other one was located just north of the home with the same property boundaries and had been previously inhabited by WS's parents before they had died decades earlier. LS and WS explained that they now owned both properties. LS stated that he was Roan's step-grandfather. When Roan, BW, and KW were children, they had come to the home many times at Redbud Lane and played in the woods around the property. LS and WS had not seen Roan in years. They did not recall seeing or hearing from him in February. They also did not observe a Dodge Durango on their property in February. However, they explained that their property between Redbud Lane and Sedgwick Road was over 20 acres and heavily wooded. They said it was possible he could have been on either of the properties during that time without their knowledge. They had never seen Oaklee and were unaware of her disappearance. LS and WS provided verbal consent for investigators to search their properties. S.A. Rothermich, Urifiant, and the assisting police officers and deputies from Morgan County, Indiana, were unable to locate Oaklee that night. On April 4th, Rothermich spoke with KW. He asked her if she had any family residing in Martinsville. She immediately named LS and WS and their residence on Redbud Lane. She stated that Roan was very familiar with their property due to how often they would play there as children. She and Roan had various locations within the wooded area that they liked to go to include hollowed-out trees, deer stands, sheds, and other enclosures. On April 5, 2023, the MCSC authorized warrants to seize and search the cellular telephone of CM that maintained the phone number 8808, as well as the cell phone number from BP that maintained the phone number 2483. The MCSC also issued a warrant for investigators to search the 305 Albany Street residence in Indiana for the pink and black colored blanket that Oaklee's body had been wrapped in. On April 6, Urifiant and S.A. Rothermich first executed the warrant at 305 Albany Street to recover the blanket. Sam was present at the house during its execution and recalled seeing a blanket that matched its description, when Roan had lived there with Marshall and her kids. However, investigators were unable to find it that day. Urifiant next re-interviewed CM. He provided additional details about the events that transpired on February 9th, admitted to receiving a phone call from Marshall that afternoon saying that Oaklee had been hurt and he needed to return to 305 Albany. He remembered her voice being very matter-of-fact, saying that he needed to bring the Durango back home for them. Upon his arrival, he did not see Oaklee. However, Roan told him multiple times that he had fucked up. CM recalled taking custody of CS, while both Marshall and Roan left the house for several hours. They returned home alone, and CM was still unaware of Oaklee's whereabouts. At the conclusion of the interview, Urifiant seized custody of CM's phone. As CM was providing the above statement, Rothermich re-interviewed BP. She ultimately provided clearer details about the series of events that transpired on February 9th. She said Roan called her in the middle of the afternoon, February 9th. He seemed panicked and told her he had to take Oaklee to the emergency room because she had fallen off of a bouncy ball and hit her head. He did not ask her for anything at the time and seemed to only want to notify her of the situation. BP could tell that he was inside of a vehicle when he made the call because he could hear his voice echo as if it was currently sitting in a small enclosed place. She could also hear a female speaking to him in the background. She strongly believed that this female was Marshall and that she was in the vehicle with him. She could not recall if the female's voice also sounded panicked. BP then called CM, who told her that he was home alone watching CS. BP picked CS up from CM at 305 Albany. She brought the baby to her place of employment while she waited for KW to arrive to take custody of him. Hours later, Roan called BP back. He stated that Marshall had made the decision to abandon Oaklee at the hospital. He provided no further details and became agitated when BP tried to question him further on this. Towards the conclusion of the interview, Rothermich asked BP if she had any prior knowledge to the circumstances of Oaklee's disappearance that she had not previously disclosed. Rothermich showed her the records from her cell phone to emphasize the reoccurring and frequent contact she had with Roan that day surrounding the likely time that Oaklee was harmed. BP again denied any further knowledge as to what happened to Oaklee or where she was. She was asked to take a polygraph test, but then she denied it because she was had a private consultation, and she decided not to do it. Following Urifiant and S.A. Rothermich obtaining these update statements that day, Gorlewski and Smeltz re-interviewed Marshall at the Harnett County Jail. Marshall again waived her Miranda rights and voluntarily made a statement. Marshall initially denied leaving 305 Albany Street with Roan on February 9th with Oaklee's body. However, she eventually admitted that she had indeed left with him to dispose of her remains. She recalled Roan driving his Dodge onto the highway away from Indianapolis with the three of them in the vehicle. She remembered seeing a sign for Martinsville shortly before exiting the highway. She then recalled Roan monitoring towards a residence along a road and telling her that it was his grandparents' house. They drove down multiple roads until they arrived at what appeared to be a dilapidated, abandoned residence, parked on top of a steep hill. Roan parked the Durango not far from it on a surrounding gravel road and carried Oaklee inside through a window. Marshall remained in the vehicle while Roan disposed of her inside of the building. She recalled seeing a white house nearby and light-colored truck drive past her on the gravel road at one point. She further recalled a light blue-colored 1970s Ford Mustang convertible parked near the structure at the top of the hill. She did not remember seeing any walkway or path that led to the abandoned house from the gravel road. Roan returned to the driver's seat a short time later and took her back to 305 Albany. She stated that Roan returned to the Durango. He informed her that he either put her inside or underneath a dresser. He then asked her if she knew where she was. Marshall responded that she thought she was in Martinsville, and he replied, "That's all I need to know." During the interview, investigators asked Marshall, "Did you even ever ask Roan to take her to a hospital?" Marshall answered, "At one point, yeah, and he told me that if we went to the hospital, I was going to go to prison, and I've never been to jail. I've never been to prison, and that's fucked up. That's my daughter." Yeah. Marshall reiterated to TFO Gorlewski that she had told BP that Roan had killed Oaklee after she was brought back to Indianapolis following his arrest in Colorado. Marshall was brought to BP right away, and BP asked her for what exactly happened to Oaklee. Marshall told her that Roan had killed her on February 9th at 305 Albany and that they had taken her to Martinsville to dispose of her body. BP then paid for Marshall's bus ticket to North Carolina and brought her a phone. However, BP told her not to activate it until she got on the bus. Marshall assumed that this was because BP did not want Marshall's locations to be tracked by police until she was gone from Indianapolis and in the event they were now looking for her. Gorlewski provided Rothermich with the details of Marshall's second statement. All right. On April 1st, Urifiant and S.A. Rothermich took temporary custody of Marshall for the purposes of re-interviewing her about the involvement of Oaklee's disappearance. Marshall was presented with an advice of rights form. Marshall stated that she understood her rights and voluntarily waived them. They next drove her to 305 Albany Street. Marshall immediately recognized the residence as the house that she had stayed in with Roan, Moncrief, and her children during portions of January and February. She also mentioned that BW had occasionally stayed at the residence as well. She explained that there was a TV just to the right of the front door, which hung over the two front windows of the house. If you turned left from the front door, you entered the dining room, which connected to a small living room. The first floor bedroom opens to this living room. The living room was also connected to a small hallway that led to the full bathroom, kitchen, as well as stairway access to the second floor and the basement. Roan Waters and Marshall had shared the first floor bedroom with Oaklee, and Oaklee slept on a cot in the living room. CS slept in a pack-and-play that was kept in the same room. Marshall then once again provided a statement as to the events that transpired, February 9th. Marshall recalled the ongoing physical abuse that Oaklee had endured at the hands of Roan in the months leading up to her death. He would frequently whoop or spank her as a form of discipline. He had also occasionally choked her out. This included for reasons of her crying, urinating in her diaper, holding a fork wrong, and other behavior common of a toddler. The abuse was so bad that Oaklee stopped eating around Roan. This was because he regularly became aggressive with her when she would not eat at the pace that he wanted her to. Marshall attempted time and time again to explain to him that she was only 2 and she did not understand what he was wanting her to do. However, his physical abuse towards Oaklee would often get redirected towards Marshall if she would attempt to interfere with it. She remembered having separate conversations with KW and BW about the abuse. She specifically asked BW to talk to his brother about it on February 8th. That day, BW came over to 305 Albany and argued with Roan in the front lawn of the house, but BW left shortly thereafter without finding a resolution. On the morning of February 9th, Marshall and Roan woke up to Oaklee crying because she was hungry. Roan threw Oaklee onto the floor in response to this, due to her crying had agitated him. Her head's impact with the floor caused Oaklee to have a red bump above her right eye. Marshall applied some of her own makeup to Oaklee's face to try to hide the bruise. Sam came downstairs at some point that day and socialized with them. Marshall prepared some ramen noodles for Oaklee as a snack because she was hungry again. Marshall then started preparing lunch for everyone. Sam said that he was going to a gas station to get some Swisher cigars. Oaklee initially tried to follow Sam out of the house, but he stopped her and told her that he would be right back. Oaklee next entered the kitchen and said, "Mama, eat," to Marshall. Marshall told her that she was making them all food and to wait in the other room. Oaklee then walked into the living room where Roan was watching TV while CS laid on the floor in front of him. Shortly thereafter, Marshall began hearing Roan Waters yell at Oaklee. He was specifically ordering her to bounce on a bouncy ball. Marshall described the ball as one of those big inflatable rubber ones with the handle. Oaklee had likely been too small to sit on it by herself. She recalled hearing Roan's voice continually getting louder and angrier as he told her to bounce. Marshall yelled back at him multiple times to calm down and that Oaklee probably did not understand what he was wanting her to do. After the 5th and loudest time that he yelled at her, Marshall stopped what she was doing in the kitchen and walked into the living room. She observed Roan standing over Oaklee as she sat trying to bounce on the ball. Roan told Marshall to quit coming in there and sat back down on the couch. Marshall took his retreat as the matter being solved, so she went back to the kitchen to prepare their meal. Marshall did not recall hearing anything else from the living room until approximately 10 minutes later. At that time, Roan screamed for her twice. Marshall had never heard Roan sound like that before. She immediately ran towards the living room. She met him in the hallway as he held Oaklee in his arms. She saw that Oaklee was not moving. Roan continually reported without prompting that he didn't do anything and that it wasn't his fault. He initially refused to let Marshall take Oaklee from him and stripped her clothes off. Marshall could see Oaklee's stomach and chest cavity extend as if she was trying to breathe air. However, she observed what appeared to be a mix of blood and spit dripping from her mouth when she tried to exhale, which created a gurgling sound. Oaklee's eyes remained closed throughout this time. Roan placed her in a nearby bathtub and attempted to douse her in cold water to wake her up. When that failed, he brought Oaklee to the bedroom and handed her to Madison. He observed Madison attempting to call 911 and slapped the phone from her hands. He then took control of his cell phone. Marshall could tell that Oaklee was dying. At some point, Roan returned the phone to her, and she called Moncrief to tell him that something had happened to Oaklee and that he needed to come home. When he entered minutes later, he stated, "I knew I shouldn't have left." Marshall explained to Urifiant and Rothermich that this meant he knew he should not have left Roan alone with Oaklee. This was because he had likely heard and been aware of the physical abuse that Roan had continually inflicted on her since moving into that house. Roan then wrapped Oaklee in a blanket and BP recently purchased for Marshall. Marshall described the blanket as being pink and black with flowers on it. She also added that it was Victoria's Secret. She placed Oaklee in the back seat of the Durango so that her feet were facing the driver's side and her head was towards the passenger side. Roan Waters entered the driver's seat and Marshall entered the passenger seat and sat with Oaklee in the back. She held Oaklee in her lap and occasionally opened the blanket to examine her. By this time, Oaklee had stopped trying to breathe and her lips became blue. Marshall felt her skin, which now seemed cool. She could also no longer feel her heartbeat. Marshall pulled Oaklee's eyelids back to further examine her, but saw no movement or response in them. She held Oaklee's hand before eventually climbing up to the front seat next to Roan. Roan drove them away from 305 towards what seemed like another town. She remembered seeing the Martinsville sign and some places that they drove past. I don't know if I have time to finish this. Let me see. Shoot. All right. So that was like really the majority of it. If you want to hear the entire ending, we can go back over that another time, or you can, if you go to Lighting The Way Home for the Vanished, she read through it all too. But Rothermich interviewed the residents surrounding the 5800 block of South Barra Road, stated that the property was owned by DP, who was currently a resident of Westfield, Indiana, had a mutual friend of DP's named MW, who had recently purchased the old 1985 Volkswagen Jetta. See, it's a lot of information that, like, it's just a lot of extra information left. But yeah, that was the gist of it. That was the whole thing. That's the end. So it's a lot to take in, and it's extremely sad. And I'm really sorry I had to cut out the beginning. It's just I can only pre-record for an hour, and I pre-recorded this because there's no way I could keep up with chat and be able to read this all at the same time. So I just went ahead and pre-recorded it, and it had to cut off the charges in the beginning. So I apologize for that, but you can very easily find their charges. You can very easily see what those are. So, but yep, that was the affidavit for Oaklee Mae Snow. May she rest in peace, and may they rot in hell. I get that Roan's the one that did it, but Madison just let it all happen. She just let it all happen because she wanted to get high. All right. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you guys. Have a nice day. Keep your chin up. It's a tough world out there.